Hello there. This is Dr. Byrne, and this is the one-take video for Pride and Prejudice. I'm not actually going to say much about Pride and Prejudice as a book, as I have in previous installments. So I thought it would be an opportunity to talk about my books. This is one of my bookshelves here. I have other bookshelves and other books. I'm recently moving into this room here, so I had to reconstitute my bookshelves and what have you. So, but first let me say something about this shot. This is a high angle shot, which means that the camera is pointed up towards me. Typically, this shot is used to make the figure or figures in the shot appear more powerful because I'm looming over you. So that I'll also mention another film term, mise en scène, which is a French term referring to all the details in the shot. So what this shot is telling you, perhaps only on a subconscious level, is that I'm a powerful figure, and I'm powerful because of my books. Books are my superpower. But the real reason why I wanted to start with this is not to impress you with my bibliographic power, but just to say something briefly about, well, to follow up what I've been saying about books as material objects. And by the way, when I use the term bibliographic or bibliography, you might think of, that's something you do, at the end of a paper you write, you put your bibliography. Well, bibliography more generally means the study of the book. So that's how I use it. So this bookshelf here, as you can see, I've got rows of books, right? And then I have stacks of books above the rows of books. That's really out of necessity, because I don't really have space for all the books that I have, particularly since I keep buying more of them. So I have to be creative in how I set up my bookshelf to fit as many books on it as possible. And so what that means is, again, I have rows of books and then stacks of books above them. And that, as I said, that allows me to fit as many in as possible. Well, what that means on a practical level is none of these books are in alphabetical order. None of them are grouped by author, because I had to move books around by size in order to create spaces to put books upon them. So in general, I mean, I have things in a area or a category, and then but there are different books in different order in that. So this is Russian, Japanese translation, European, German, French, South American, Central American, literary criticism, British, American, over on this side. So how this effect is involved with the materiality of the book is that there are many different sizes of books, though not as many as there once were. I mean, the biggest is the quarto. After that, no, I'm sorry, the biggest is the folio, then it's the quarto, then it's the octavo, and then it's 12 mo, 16 mo, 18 mo. Most of the, general paperbacks that you might buy in the supermarket, for instance, those are like 16 and 18 mo, small. There are books, oh, here it is. This is a translation of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. This is in an octavo size, so a bigger size. So the reason that's important, because historically, the size of the book often determined the price of the book, and the price of the book often determined the audience for the book. Back in the day, say in the 19th century, the time of Austen, this would have been a very important distinction. It's not as much anymore, but I mean, this book does indeed cost, it's $15. It's roughly twice as much as a smaller paperback. So yeah, you aren't going to buy this in the grocery store. So what all that is to say is that I have my octavos in certain areas on the show, and my 16 mo works on another part of the show, also that I can create shelf space above the rows of books. Clever, no? Okay, and now I'm going to change gears, and I'm going to change the camera and its angle to make me less powerful. Hopefully, you won't get too dizzy in the transition. There we go. Just an ordinary professor now, not a bibliographic Superman. Okay. All right. So let me just, we're at 5 minutes. Okay. What am I doing? I'm playing around with my Kindle. Okay. So, I've talked about books. Let me talk about Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice. I'm not going to say much about Bride and Prejudice. Again, I feel like I cover that fairly well in my film essay. But I am going to talk about Pride and Prejudice. Jane Austen is, well, a figure you may have read in the college classroom. She's become quite popular. I mean, for one thing, she's a woman writer, and a lot of professors try to get woman writers on the syllabi, and that is certainly important. But her books are also fairly short compared to many of the books written by her contemporaries. I mean, a lot of the books were published in, like, say, 3 volumes. They published 1 volume at a time, kind of like with Tristram Shandy, but they had what were called triple deckers. So books that had, like, 800 pages or something. They're big fat books. Jane Austen, her books are much more slim, so it's a lot easier to read a Jane Austen novel in say a survey class than a big fat book in 3 volumes and 800 pages. So that's not to say that Jane Austen is not deserving of her current place in the literary canon. She is certainly a brilliant writer, and part of her popularity is that even in the college classroom is that she has this wonderful sardonic wit and this wonderful voice. And again, that's not something easily translated to film, and I'll return to that point in a moment. But one of the things that most interests me about Austen, and I'll just say I've written, presented a couple papers on Jane Austen in my academic career. But even though Austen ends up on a lot of syllabi these days, she's usually sort of shoehorned into what's called the Romantic movement. And the British Romanticism starts roughly 1789, the year of the French Revolution, and then goes to 1832. So that's the Romantic period. Well-known writers of the time are, say, Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, William Blake, William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and a lot more women have been introduced to the canon, the British Romantic canon as well. So even though Austen is usually put on the syllabi in the Romantic period, she herself is not a romantic writer. She is more of her social or realist novel, and so she sort of harkens back to the realist novel of the mid 18th century in Britain, Henry Fielding, and he's probably the most prominent writer of that time in creating that tradition of the realist novel. And Austen also anticipates the social realist novel of the 19th century in Britain, writers like Charles Dickens and George Eliot. So I'm saying Jane Austen is not a romantic. What does that mean? Well, let me consider what I consider three of the main characteristics of Romanticism. The first one is imagination, that the Romantics venerated imagination, works of the imagination, creativity, art, all of those things. Um, Jane Austen is not that much concerned with imagination and creativity. As I said, she's a realist, a novelist, and that's sort of the opposite spectrum from the imagination. Secondly, the Romantics were concerned with illicit passion and unconventional sexuality. People like well, Lord Byron and Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley, for in particular. Shelley ran off with Mary Shelley when she was 16 years old, and anyway, they had a very unconventional relationship. Um, that none of that is in Austen. Very conventional sexuality. In fact, there's very little, if no, mention of sexuality whatsoever, and no illicit passion. Basically, as extreme as it gets is a woman in the gentry who wants to marry someone uh, in the upper class, or what have you. That's as radical and as crazy and as illicit and unconventional as it gets. Um, Third, the Romantics were very interested in radical politics, and that's the first generation. Let's say William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. They were rabid revolutionists until later in life when they became more conservative. Um, so the dealing with the aftermath of the French Revolution for the first generation of Romantics was that's kind of what they were concerned with. Second generation, Byron, Shelley, is more concerned with dealing with the figure of Napoleon, who was a very divisive figure, needless to say, in British history, particularly since Britain spent 20 years fighting Napoleon and eventually defeated him. So, politically radical. Jane Austen is not politically radical. She represents the viewpoint of the gentry and is, well, I want to say extremely unpolitical, but she's very political in that politics does not seem to play any role whatsoever in her novels, when in fact it was, a burning topic at the time. So, there's a British critic named Raymond Williams. He wrote a book called The Country and the City, and he introduces a phrase he calls the noble community in the context of Jane Austen. Uh, a noble community is really the people you're allowed to see at any given time. And in Jane Austen's time, the classes were very divided and distinct from one another. So a noble community is, for someone in the gentry, is other people in the gentry. Whereas if you're, a poor person, you work in a factory, or you're a peasant who works on the land, you're not even going to see them because they're not in your class. They, in a sense, they don't exist to you. And that's what we get in Jane Austen, this noble community, and people who know one another. But it's very, very hard to crack those particular circles. Um, so, well, I want to mention one big reason why Jane Austen has been, in effect, romanticized, even though she wasn't a romantic. It's mostly television and films which have romanticized Jane Austen. A good example would be the most recent adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, the one with Keira Knightley, which is a fine adaptation. It's a very, very good film and a good adaptation. But it does romanticize Austen and romanticize Pride and Prejudice. I'll mention one example in the film. At one point, Lizzie, she, stands on a promontory in a very wide, long shot of her, and the wind is blowing, and there's this beautiful vista, around her, and that's nowhere in Austen, in her novels, anywhere. She wasn't a big enthusiast of nature. Again, that's a concern of the Romantics, who are, particularly Wordsworth, identified with a love of nature. You don't find that in Austen, but you do find it in this particular film. And, there are other examples as well. And I will just throw out one thing, is that in the book, books are very, very important. They, in a sense, make Lizzie Bennett, a sort of superhero. We first meet her in the book. She had in the novel. She has a book in her hand. Oftentimes she does in the novel. So reading is left out of most film and TV adaptations, in addition to Jane Austen's voice. Austen is also popular in, well, very prominent in popular culture. Um, there was a book came out a few years ago called Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which I read and liked very much. It has zombies, but also a lot of martial arts, and it's really interesting. A film adaptation is supposedly coming to a theater near us sometime in the near future. There's also Death Comes to Pemberley, which was written by P.D. James, recently deceased, who, like other authors, basically sort of channels Jane Austen, takes her characters and writes new stories for them. In Death Comes to Pemberley, there's a murder at Pemberley, and Lizzie and Darcy are called upon to solve the crime. And I haven't read the book, but there was a masterpiece mystery adaptation this past year that I did see and was quite good. All right. So what makes these books successful in my mind is that they mimic Austen's voice fairly well, and that's a good part of the humor of it, is to see sort of these outlandish stories in being told in this Austen-esque voice. So, and again, as I've been saying, that's something that gets lost in film and television adaptations, which tend to focus more on character and plot than on voice and narrative. So, and basically, what that means is that Austen has been romanticized by having her voice removed. Basically, we just have her storylines and her characters, and that they're easily romanticized, particularly once you take her voice away. Okay, I'm going to stop there at 17 minutes. This might not go, but we'll see.